What you are about to hear is the story of Captain James Blackhawk-Finn and Isabella, a love born in defiance of society, bound by passion, and tested by the dangers of the open sea. In a world where loyalty and betrayal blur, they face an impossible choice between love and survival. Beneath the fiery hues of a setting sun, the secluded cove on the island was quiet, save for the rhythmic lull of waves kissing the shore. This hidden inlet had become their refuge, a place where a notorious pirate captain and a woman of noble birth could escape the burdens of their worlds, if only for a few stolen moments. Her name was Isabella, and against every restriction of her noble lineage, she had chosen to be with him James Blackhawk-Finn, the feared captain of the Crimson Serpent. James had known countless women across the seven seas, but none had captivated him like Isabella. There was a strength and fearlessness in her gaze that matched the fire in his own, an intensity that had shattered the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. For Isabella, James was freedom embodied, a thrilling escape from the predictable, stifling life planned by her family. That evening, she lay with her head against his chest, the faint scent of sea salt mingling with the warmth of his skin. "James, I could stay here forever," she murmured, fingers tracing the map of scars that marked his chest, reminder of his life of risk and survival. Her voice was soft, yet beneath it was a longing, a plea for something more than fleeting encounters. But James knew their time was limited. A fierce loyalty to his crew and a thirst for freedom had always driven him forward, but loving Isabella had complicated everything. He wanted to give her the life she deserved, yet he knew that by staying with him, she risked losing her own future. "We may not have forever, love," he replied, his rough voice softened by her touch. "But as long as the sea calls me, I'll come back for you." He pulled her close, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead, as though he could bind her to him with that one simple act. The tranquility of the moment shattered as one of James's crewmates, a weary man named Rook, stumbled into the clearing. His face was pale, and his voice carried an urgency that made Isabella's heart sink. "Captain, they're coming," Rook announced, his eyes darting nervously between them. A Royal Navy ship was spotted off the coast, and they're closing in fast. James's jaw clenched, his instincts kicking in. The Royal Navy had been on his trail for months, but he hadn't expected them to reach the island so soon. He looked to Isabella, whose face mirrored the fear in his heart. Without a word, he took her hand, and they sprinted toward the hidden cove where his ship lay anchored, the Crimson Serpent waiting for its captain. He could feel the weight of Isabella's trust as she followed him, her hand firmly grasping his despite the dangers that lay ahead. They reached the ship just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the island in shadows. James hoisted Isabella aboard, his mind racing as he barked orders to his crew to prepare for a hasty escape. He knew that every second mattered. As the sails caught the wind, Isabella clung to James's side, her heart pounding as they sailed into the darkness. The chase had begun, and though they had escaped the island, she knew they would never truly be safe. In that moment, the thrill of the open sea mingled with the bittersweet knowledge that her life with James would forever be marked by danger. The Crimson Serpent cut through the moonlit waves, the wind filling its sails as they raced away from the island and the approaching Royal Navy. Isabella stood at the edge of the deck, her hair whipping around her face, watching as the island faded into the distance. She felt a pang of sadness mixed with exhilaration, knowing she had traded a life of certainty for one of freedom and uncertainty beside James. As the night wore on, James noticed something unusual among his crew. Tension simmered beneath the surface, glances were exchanged, voices were hushed. There was an unease that had crept aboard since their hurried departure from the island. James knew his crew well enough to sense the shift, and his instincts screamed that danger lay not just behind them, but within the ranks of his own men. James pulled Isabella aside, his expression guarded. "Something's wrong, Isabella. Someone on this ship may have tipped off the Navy. I can feel it in my bones." Her face paled at the thought. "Who would betray you?" she asked, the hurt and anger evident in her voice. James's jaw tightened. Pirates follow gold love, and there are some aboard who would sell their loyalty to the highest bidder. He glanced at Rook, who had seemed overly anxious since delivering the warning earlier. But his gaze softened as he looked back at her. "Stay close to me. I won't let anything happen to you." As the night deepened, whispers drifted across the deck, and James kept a close watch on his crew. He knew that if there was a traitor among them, any move they made would be dangerous. But Isabella's presence added a complication he had never faced before. His decisions weren't just for himself and his crew, they were for her as well. Just as dawn began to break over the horizon, the lookout cried, "Ship approaching, Captain." The sight of the Royal Navy ship in pursuit confirmed James's suspicions. Someone had given their position away. The crew scrambled, preparing for the inevitable clash as the Royal Navy ship closed in. Isabella clutched James's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "James, they're almost upon us," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What do we do?" James gave her a fierce look, his eyes burning with determination. "We fight. And if we survive, we'll deal with the traitor." As the Navy ship neared, the first cannonball whistled through the air, narrowly missing the Serpent's hull. James bellowed orders, and the crew sprang into action, returning fire with everything they had. The deck was a flurry of movement, cannon smoke filling the air as they fought off the assault. Isabella stayed by James's side, her heart pounding with terror and adrenaline as she watched him transform into the fearless pirate captain she had fallen in love with. But in the midst of battle, Isabella noticed Rook slipping toward the edge of the deck, a signal flare in his hand. Her heart dropped as she realized he was sending a signal to the Navy, guiding them in their pursuit. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, catching Rook's arm before he could light the flare. "Traitor!" she hissed, her voice filled with rage. Rook sneered, jerking his arm free, but James was already there, his sword drawn. "Rook, you'll pay for this betrayal," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Rook's eyes darted around, realizing he was trapped. "They offered me freedom, James. A life free from running and hiding. Something you could never give any of us." With a snarl, he threw himself overboard, disappearing into the waves below before anyone could stop him. The Navy ship continued its relentless pursuit, but with Rook gone, James and his crew fought with renewed fervor. Finally, after a brutal skirmish, the Navy ship began to retreat, their hull battered and their sails tattered. Exhausted and wounded, the crew cheered as the Royal Navy vessel disappeared over the horizon. James turned to Isabella, pulling her into his arms. "We made it, love," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "But I fear we're never safe, not while they know we're together." Isabella clung to him, her heart aching at the truth of his words. "Then we'll face whatever comes, side by side," she replied, her voice steady with resolve. She knew that their love was bound to the dangers of his world, but for him, she would face any threat, any risk. As dusk settled over the ocean, the Crimson Serpent sailed on, her crew battered but victorious. Isabella sat with James on the aft deck, the horizon painted in hues of gold and crimson. Though their love was fierce, they both understood the gravity of what lay ahead. Their survival had come at a high cost, and with the Navy on their trail, they had no choice but to stay on the run. Days passed, and the relentless pursuit of the Navy loomed like a dark shadow over their every moment together. For James, this was the price of his freedom, the life he had chosen long ago. But for Isabella, it was a life she had willingly embraced, knowing that loving him meant a future fraught with danger and uncertainty. One evening, as the crew quietly gathered below deck, James took Isabella's hands in his. "Isabella," he began, his voice soft but weighted with the knowledge of what he was about to say. "I have to give you a choice. You don't belong to this world, and while you're with me, you'll always be hunted, always looking over your shoulder." Her gaze never wavered, a fierce determination lighting her eyes. "James, I knew what I was risking when I chose you. I left behind everything for this life for you. Don't ask me to turn back now." A knot tightened in his throat as he brushed a stray hair from her face, the flicker of lanterns casting soft shadows across her features. "If you stay with me, I cannot promise you anything but a life on the run, dangers at every turn." He hesitated, struggling with the words he had never wanted to say. "There's a small port we're passing soon. I can arrange for you to stay there, safe, away from this." Isabella's face paled, the weight of his offer settling heavily between them. She knew that he was giving her an escape, a chance to live a safer life. But that life would mean being without him, away from the man who had awakened a fire in her heart that no one else could ever quench. "No," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I'd rather face 1,000 dangers with you than live safely without you." Her hand found his, squeezing tightly as she continued. "If we must run, then we run together. My life is with you, James, no matter where it takes us." In that moment, he knew that nothing could break the bond between them. Not the Navy, not the dangers of his world, nor the betrayals they had faced. They were bound together by something far stronger than any force that threatened to tear them apart. Just as they shared a kiss, the quiet watchman's shout broke through the silence. Ship on the horizon. Navy colors. James's expression hardened, but this time he felt an unwavering strength beside him. Isabella's hand was firm in his, her resolve as fierce as his own. "Then let them come," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll face them together." As the Crimson Serpent turned to confront the approaching threat, James felt a surge of purpose he had never known before. The life of a pirate was one of hardship and danger, but with Isabella by his side, he felt ready to fight, to live, and to love with a depth he had never imagined. Their future remained uncertain, the ocean stretching before them filled with countless dangers. But together, they were unstoppable, a captain and his love, defying the world that sought to keep them apart.